Howdy. Howdy. Thank you so much. This is something new to you, right? Thank you so much for coming. My name is Hwa-young Seo, Director for the Institute for Applied Creativity. Have to practice so many times, Institute for Applied Creativity. We're so happy to have you here. This is our second Laser Talk series of this season. We're also very happy to have this series connect with inaugural Creative Care Conference. So I'm so glad you're here, part of it, and then hopefully you are also checking other sessions, part of Creative Care Conference. The Institute for Applied Creativity, we support faculty, students, and the committee through interdisciplinary collaboration. So if you're interested in being part of the Institute, let us know. There are opportunities for faculty, students, and committee as well. This amazing event is supported by our institute as well as College of PBFA and also University Art Galleries. This event cannot be done without our amazing team, Dr. Lynn Barton and also Shipra Sinha back there. So I'd like to invite Lynn to introduce more about the laser program as well as the speaker today. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We love to see this audience growing and growing every month. As you know, the series is a monthly series. Our format is a little bit different than a typical conference presentation. Our guest speaker will speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll transition to have a conversation. And if you have any questions at that time, we invite you to participate as well. I'd like to also say that this particular event is part of a larger conference that's going on called the Creative Care Conference. We're super excited to be partnering all over campus and with our colleagues. So if you have any questions about that, please let me know. But now to just tell you a little bit about our speaker. So William Doan, there's so many things to say. I mean, he has done so many things, articles and published plays on the plays and theater of George Bernard Shaw, but also just a little bit about his background. Penn State at 2008 as Associate Dean for Administration, Research, and Graduate Studies for the College of Arts and Architecture, full-time at the School of Theater in 2013, President of the Association for Theater and Higher Ed, and many, many more things. But the one thing that I want to tell you, so you have a little taste of what you're going to hear, is what we had on the flyer, which is drawings move, stories breathe, and data turns human, tracing the journey as a visual and performing artist working with scientists to create images, animations, and performances that speak to health, illness, and the fragile art of well-being. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bill Doan.
Hello. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Great. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you to Hwa-young and thank you, Lynn, and everybody involved with this invitation and getting me here safely. Travel is precarious these days, so I'm grateful that that all worked out. I've been here less than 24 hours, way less than 24 hours, in fact. But I'm always amazed in how such a short time, how much you can learn about a place and the people and the quality of work that's happening there in the Institute for Applied Creativity, in your college. I like to be reminded of that because these kinds of invitations can make you feel way more special than you are, right? I mean, the work that's being done here, I've been on the website, I've been looking at people, is incredible work, and my imposter syndrome immediately jumped up and said, why did they invite you? What's wrong with these people? But I really appreciate being here, and I appreciate the opportunity to share this work with you, and hopefully we'll all get something from it together. So I'm going to be talking about a little more than sort of a decade of my work, and within that context, several projects, major projects that I'll focus on that are the most interdisciplinary, the most collaborative, the most integrative of art and science in the work that I've been lucky enough to do. And I kind of stand on the shoulders of a whole bunch of collaborators that aren't here with me. In Penn State School of Nursing, in the College of Medicine, in the Emotional Development Lab, in psychology. And I mean, none of this work is just my work, except maybe the drawings. That's about the extent of it. But the work that I'm going to be talking about today really began not so much in the spirit of research, but with loss. In 2012, my sister was in a terrible car accident that left her in a vegetative state from a traumatic brain injury. For 2 years, we lived in that liminal space between hope and inevitability until she died. During those 2 years, I drew her again and again and again. Those drawings eventually became the foundation for a performance, a video piece, and a graphic medicine publication in the Annals of Graphic Medicine. Her body, the tangle of tubes, the fragile lines of her face as time passed and she wasted away. They were my, it's been a lot of years, but they were my way of staying present to her when words failed and when the science of what was happening to her was beyond me. I consulted with a traumatic brain injury specialist and palliative caregivers while I was creating the performance. Their experience grounded the piece in medical reality. My drawings, I believed, carried the emotional truth of watching a sibling disappear. This is just a selection of some of those images that were part of the performance and the video piece. Those drawings still take me back to a place I don't necessarily love to go, but it's been such an important part of this work. In both the performance piece and then in the publication work around this project, which was called Drifting, my personal artistic and the clinical knowledge I was gaining blended together. Audiences told me they not only understood something about TBIs that they didn't understand before, but that they also felt the weight of that TBI. They felt its uncertainty, its quiet devastation. Those experiences convinced me that art and science are not the opposites my education, training, and biases had led me to believe, And so I wondered how they could be partners, how they could make each other more whole. So I started to actively seek collaborative opportunities with researchers whose work is grounded in science. One of my most valued collaborations was with nurse researchers, and it happened at the beginning of the COVID era when a nursing colleague of mine was beginning to document what nurses endured during the earliest days of COVID-19. The data collected from using story circles, which I led, a qualitative methodology, if anybody has questions about that later. The data was stark: trauma scores, fatigue scales, stress indicators. But what did it feel like to stand at a patient's bedside in a room full of risk? What did it mean to hold up a tablet so a family could say goodbye from afar? And what was the impact of that on those nurses in that room? With a team of artists and nurse researchers, we created an animation, also a publication in Intima, the Journal of Narrative Medicine. This particular animation, which I'll show the bulk of it here, called Frontline Nurses, it screened in 10 festivals internationally and won an award in the World Health Organization's Health for All Film Festival, and took Best Animation at the International Film Festival of The Hague. It's hand-drawn animation with a little bit of magic from our main animator going on as well. So. Volume's a little low.
They're just dying alone. We're all gowned up. Faces. We can't hold their feet. And you try to provide them as much comfort as you can. But how do I provide comfort to 15 people who are all dying at the same time? One ship died, and 6 people died in 6 hours. That's 6 families I had to call.
So this one time, my wife asked me if I would phone up to her husband's group because her granddaughter and grandfather were like, she sees in a pod, and it means so much to him to hear her voice.
We had, I think, a total in general 53 private responses in the month of January. And we intubated so many patients. My anxiety went through the roof. Watching people struggle for weeks to breathe. Finally getting some relief that they're not struggling, but then the fear of, are they going to wake up?
I remember one of the first patients that died of COVID. We called infection control to see how to deal with the body. He went so quickly, but wow, he just turned on a dime. I remember ramping him up, told us not to deal in him or exfoliate, and to leave everything in. And we had to write COVID all over the bag, not just in one spot, but all over the bag. So I wiped everything down, shoved him into this anteroom, closed the door.
We were all afraid of what we didn't know. We didn't understand what the water meant. Everything was changing in it by minute. None of us knew what to do or when to do it. We had to learn quickly and improvise, like how to make sleep packs, how to empty bags. I actually tried to type up a list of policies to use for nurses in your shift. But by the next day, half the things on the list were wrong because protocol had already changed. At one point, we ran out of PPE, and the Army is providing clean us gowns. I swear they were made out of waterproofs. And at first, we were told not to wear masks because we would scare the patients. Then, sometimes the same mask over and over and over again.
You know, I never got a single day off during this whole pandemic.
I've had someone refused to get tested, despite having many COVID symptoms. So that she didn't believe in it. She also didn't believe in the food, and that she was just going to go out and live her life the way she wanted to.
They don't see the data. They don't see the people that the exhaustion and the look on the faces of the physicians and nurses.
This viral videos of people packed with pools and bugs. They're maybe not 16 to 16.
That's just correct. I have to be okay with that.
I'm really tired after all this. Besides nursing, I got to know what I would do. I don't know how long I'm going to do it. I just don't do it anymore. I'm just so tired. Just more and more cases.
So as I said, we used a method called story circles, and it was actually during COVID, so we had to conduct them via Zoom because we couldn't, all of our campuses were shut down, obviously. And the stories that the nurses told, we used verbatim. There was no editing. This is pretty much a documentary style approach to making the animation. We didn't intervene in their stories. We didn't choose one story over another for any particular reasons. Because we were also seeking publication, we had to be very careful in terms of how we managed the data, what we did with the data, how we stored the data, how we used the data, et cetera. But it was the impact on the healthcare field in general, not just nurses, on physicians, on home healthcare workers. The downturn is something that will probably be with us easily through 2030 in terms of as these fields of care try to come back and recover from this. The next project I want to share, and this video, I know the audio is pretty weak on this, so you may have to strain a little bit. But I think it also has subtitles, so hopefully you can keep up with it. Another collaboration I did also with nurse researchers whose work is transforming healthcare practices in their field focuses on delirium, and particularly distinction between delirium and dementia. People suffering with delirium is a completely treatable situation that can be dealt with and resolved, as opposed to dementia, which is generally a progressive disease that needs completely different protocols. And what these nurse researchers I was working with discovered was that particularly in the home healthcare field, there was a lack of a reliable tool for making a distinction between a home health patient who was suffering from delirium and one who was suffering from dementia, and it was resulting in all kinds of problems, hospitalization, unnecessary, et cetera, et cetera. And so, again, we're using story circles as a method. We interviewed about 30 home health care workers from different disciplines, from EMTs to home health care nurses to nurse aides, and about their experiences with a patient who was suspected of either having delirium or dementia, how they proceeded, et cetera, et cetera. And part of that story circle collection was then the data that the nursing team used to develop a metric for home health care workers to use for making a diagnosis. So let me share
The instant she was looking at her photograph, this is my favorite vacation in Niagara Falls, said It was so cute how a little baby wanted to carry that big umbrella up the path.
must be Janet to help with your exercises, said Frank. Hi, Frank. Hi, Millie. How's your hip this week? I asked. Oh, it's fine, said Millie. Tell what you told me yesterday when I helped you to the bathroom, Frank said. Well, that doesn't have anything to do with my hip, Frank. She said there was a burning sensation. I've been recording her fluid intake and when she uses the toilet. Now, let me get that paperwork. We might want to check you for a UTI since you had a catheter during surgery. But before that, Mary, let's check your vitals and get you up for a short walk. I approached Mary and asked, and she started acting strange. I could tell right away something wasn't right. She started tapping her hand hard on the book, kind of aggressively, and talking about her son Ben. I tried to take her vitals, but she pushed me away. Where's Ben? Who's Ben? I asked. You know who Ben is. You took him. She wasn't making any sense. She was really confused. That's when Frank came back. She took Ben. Ben is fine, said Frank. He's living in San Diego. Remember? We spoke to him on the telephone just yesterday morning. Janet is here for home health care to help with your hip. You just had surgery. I asked her a few questions to help figure out what was going on. Millie, can you tell me your birth date? Who's the president? But she couldn't answer. Don't you touch me! She never acted like this before, said Frank. What's happening? Frank was really worried. I have an idea, I said to Frank, but I want to call the hospital to make sure. Frank, you stay here and be sure Millie does not try to get up or hurt herself. Hi, Dr. Flora. This is Janet. I'm with a patient who's acting unusual. She's very confused and aggressive. Could you lead me through the symptoms for patients with delirium? Is the onset of her confusion acute? Does it tend to come and go? Asked Dr. Flora. It's definitely an acute onset. Correct.
I'm going to jump us ahead just for the sake of time, but that animation was funded by a research group between Penn State and Harvard. And it wasn't for commercial release, it's been used in nurse training programs. The animation is part of a whole curriculum. At the end of the animation, we provide the metric that the nurse research team developed, and then nurses who use the film then train student nurses and other home health care workers in the use of the metric. So it was kind of developed specifically for educational purposes. But what was fascinating to me was in the Story Circle collection, you know, the home health care workers literally described people talking about walls melting, things unraveling, things that they had never encountered and didn't know what to do about. And so in the animation, we tried to, you know, capture some of that with the bleeding colors, the clocks ticking out of rhythm, etc. Another was a terrific project. The nurse research team drove the project. My team were equal partners at the table, but we waited for, you know, them to direct sort of where they wanted the creative work to go, but they also sought a lot of input from us as well. Alongside these collaborations, and there are several others that I just don't have the time to talk about, as an artist, I had also turned pretty strongly inward, drawing, writing, and I began to make performances about my own lifetime struggle with anxiety and depression, someone who's been twice diagnosed. And this was simultaneously to all of this work reaching a crisis point for me. I filled sketchbooks with trembling lines, restless scribbles, spirals that tightened and unraveled. They weren't simply drawings, they were visual echoes of how my nervous system felt. It was shaky, relentless, looping over and over and over. So I started to put some of that work into performance, both as kind of a form of self-therapy and trying to figure out what the hell was going on, and to see, I guess, in some ways, if anybody that saw the work would go, hey, I think I can help you, right? Some weird artistic cry for help, maybe. The first piece was called A Brief Anatomy of My Anxiety, which also resulted in a publication in the Annals of Graphic Medicine, but it was a performance piece that I premiered at the Dixon Place Theater in New York City, and then I performed it at about, I think, 11 other venues around the country. And in it, I started turning to some of the clinical language around anxiety and depression and mental illness as a way of trying to find my relationship to those things as an artist. But to try and deal with symptoms not as bullet points, but as sensations that the audience could feel rippling through my own body as I performed. The other project that developed out of that was another performance piece called Frozen in the Toilet Paper Aisle of Life. It was born from a moment so ordinary and so absurd that I had to make a piece out of it. I was standing, this is true, I was standing in a grocery store aisle, a Walmart, staring at the rows of toilet paper, unable to decide, paralyzed by the weight of a choice that just shouldn't matter. And I'll just do a little section of that performance for you right now. So one day I find myself frozen in the toilet paper aisle at Walmart. I mean, I don't mind grocery shopping. In fact, usually I enjoy it. But when you're in the grip of an anxiety attack, it's just glaring lights, throngs of people grabbing cereal, personal hygiene products, dairy-free, dairy substitute products. Why are there so damn many soaps, shampoos, smells, textures, lubricants? Really? Do we really need that many I'm like a deer in headlights. The toilet paper aisle is at least a quarter of a mile long. I'm completely overwhelmed by all the styles, plies, textures, brands. My eyes run up and down, right to left to right, frantically scanning for something to make sense, for a reason to reach out and grab a 4-pack, 6-pack, 8-pack lifetime supply of 1-ply, 2-ply, textured, smooth, lotion infused. I look at my watch. I've been standing in the toilet paper aisle of Walmart for 5 minutes. Why won't my feet move forward? So I do what I always do. I pull out my phone and I call my wife. Hello? Where are you? She asks. I'm in the toilet paper aisle. I can't decide. I can't choose. I can't remember what we use. What are you talking about? She demands. I don't know what to do. I asked my butt and it said it doesn't give a shit. And I said, you're being such an asshole. Then I noticed that people are staring at me. Help me. Tell me what to buy. 2-ply, she says, matter-of-factly. We've been here before. Have you ever found yourself stuck in a moment like that? A panic attack, standing in front of, I don't know, maybe the refrigerator at night, or unable to decide, or hovering over reply all, frozen with indecision. So I also started making animations at this time. Dark clouds swirling in endless loops, lines colliding, marks chasing each other across the screen before dissolving into silence. Some of this work found its way into my actual first animated short that I used with the solo performance piece that I was touring at the time, called Inhale, Exhale, Draw.
From all outward appearances, I was a confident, self-possessed person.
And inside, I was slowing down. Like most people with anxiety and depression, I would try to keep me straight. I thought the problem was me. I was different and not enough. I was weird. As I got older, I felt angry. It got harder and harder to keep my secret. When it was time to come out of the room, I didn't know how. So I started drawing.
So I started trying. The images captured how I was feeling much better than any words I tried to use. After 3 years of making work, I felt a growing sense that I might actually become a part of the series. Once I understood how good drawing makes me feel, I became intentional about drawing. I draw every day, and sometimes I'll just simply draw what I see: birds, flowers, landscapes, people, myself, to stay grounded in the here and now. Inhale, exhale, breathe. Now draw. Drawing can provide just the distraction your brain needs. So grab a pencil, a pen, a crayon, a piece of chalk, anything you can make a mark. And then find some paper, any paper. Draw things you can see in the room. Draw things you see outside the window. Use more than one of the tools that you picked up and make marks. Doodle, scribble, draw for at least 10 or 15 minutes. And don't worry what it looks like. Just do it. Your brain will thank you.
So this work led me to the last project I want to share quickly. And in fact, I'm probably going to skip that video just for time's sake. But there is a link to it I can share with you later on if you're interested. But this project then led me to the work I've been doing with a neuropsychologist at the Emotion Development Lab at Penn State called the Mind Study, a project that was ultimately awarded a Renee Fleming Neuro Arts Award about 1.5 years ago, and we're about ready to publish the first set of data, and phase 2 of the study is now fully underway as well. So I wanted to investigate whether drawing, which I believed was changing my brain, that a simple daily meditational approach to drawing could reduce anxiety, and I wondered if it could become a habitual behavior for some people like me, who it's the first positive habitual behavior I've ever developed, which is drawing as meditation. I had lots of other habitual behaviors that weren't all that positive. And so I approached this colleague of mine at the Emotion Development Lab, Dr. Sarah Myruski, who was really intrigued by the question as well. And that's the work we've been doing for the last couple of years. The evidence as clearly shows that this approach to mindful drawing shows a reduction in anxiety as well as a number of other results. Since we're no longer under a review, we're about to be published, so I couldn't share any more of the, how that data is proprietary crap stuff. But out of respect for my colleagues, that's it. But it's been kind of a really exciting journey, and the second phase of it, we have actually been using sensors to track beta activity in the brain during the mindfulness drawing sessions too. And then the clinical participants go home and proceed on their own for 8 weeks. So the data collection has gotten much more substantial, much more significant, and our hope is to be able to scale the project up in some interesting and exciting ways. So I'm just going to wrap up now because I want to make sure we have some time for conversation. So from my sister's story to the COVID wards, from delirium to drawing lines of my own, I guess the bottom line is I've learned one thing. Human well-being is fragile. And no single language, the language of science, the language of art, the language of psychology, whatever it is, no single language is large enough to describe the fragility of human well-being. We need to bring those languages together somehow. In my experience, science was always telling me what was happening, and as an artist, I was trying to let people know what it felt like. And together I thought, well, maybe those things reveal the fullness of health, the fullness of illness, the fullness of caring for others, the fullness of loss. When I draw, when I perform, whatever it is, I'm not escaping reality. I'm entering into it more fully. If the artist asks, what does this feel like? And the scientist asks, what's happening? For me, it's somewhere between those questions where the real fertile ground of imagination dancing with evidence occurs. Drawings move, stories breathe, data becomes human. And in that dance, hopefully we glimpse not only a more humane science, but also a more grounded art. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bill. We'll transition here and invite Waryong as well, and we'll continue our conversation. And Waryong, if you just switch the switch on that mic to turn it on, that would be great. Perfect. Well, I'll start out with a question, but of course, as always, if any of you have any questions, I would love to field them from the house, so to speak. But Bill, thank you so much for sharing your work with us and for being here. I wanted to ask you maybe a question that everybody is wondering about, and that is, how do you manage the vulnerability in your work? It's so vulnerable, and that is, do you feel that it seems very brave to me. How do you manage that? How does that sit with you? What thoughts do you have about that?
I probably don't let myself think about it too much for fear that I'll lose it. But I do think it is a great question, right? Because it's on a daily basis in our lives. We have multiple opportunities to choose to be vulnerable, to be open, to be compassionate, to be understanding, or to not be, right? It is a choice that we make in the relationships that we have. And so I also think, I've been married for 44 years to the same woman, and we have one daughter, and I think their influence in my life is undeniable. And now I have 2 grandchildren who I think about them and tears come to my eyes. So I think I have allowed myself, and in terms of my mental health journey, there was a point where choosing to be vulnerable was a matter of survival. And making that choice and making it over and over again was, I think, also part of what led me to the drawing as meditation activity.
And do you feel that choice then, of course, evolved your personal life, but evolved the art? Did that vulnerability open up the relationships or open up the work as well, do you feel?
Yeah, definitely. If I think back, even when I was in high school and, I was a jock, and there was a music teacher who was quite beautiful and who talked me into doing a play. And all of a sudden, it became not so much about, wow, she's beautiful. I was a 16-year-old male. But I was suddenly in this completely new environment, and where everybody was willing to be vulnerable. The students in the theater group, the students, making costumes, doing the scenery, and that's, I think, in the end, what drew me to theater too. But there was a kind of compassion and vulnerability that wasn't there in the other kind of social aspects of my life that really did change me early on and kind of change my vision of, who I wanted to be, right?
Yeah, thank you. And another question, and then hopefully maybe there's a few in the audience, is I love the work that you've done with drawing, and I'm really looking forward to your study and reading more about it. Do you feel that there is that possibility to unlock with all of the arts and mindfulness, or do you feel that there's something specific to the act of drawing, or is it personally, I mean, does it depend on the person? What are your opinions on that?
I do think that it's the purview of all of the arts. I really do. And what's interesting is we know that there are significant bodies of research about the impact of music on the brain, on the heart, on people's compassion. And there are various studies specifically in the visual arts about, life drawing. There's been research done on the impact of life drawing. So I do think it's definitely connected to the practice of the arts. What I was curious about is, does drawing in particular activate parts of the brain, or does it do it in a different way from music, from dance, from other forms even of visual art? My unofficial teacher, because I'm not a trained artist, I'm a theater person. I was trained as an actor and then as a theater historian. And in fact, for 15 years of my career, I collaborated with a Hebrew Bible scholar and wrote 3 books on performance traditions and the Hebrew Bible. So I've been on, it's my ADHD, I'm all over the map. Can't stay anywhere for too long. But I met Frederick Frank. I don't know if any of you know that name. He was an artist who was an oral surgeon on Albert Schweitzer's medical team in the jungle, and later became an artist. He lived to almost be 100 years old. And he wrote a book called The Zen of Seeing, which was one of the first, it was a hand-drawn book, one of the first books on the intersection of Eastern and Western thinking about art-making processes. And Frederick taught workshops on the Zen of seeing, and my own approach to drawing as meditation evolved out of that. And I used to take my drawings to Frederick, and he would go through them. And when he was done, there'd be a 3-foot stack of drawings, and he would say, these are crap. These can hang in any McDonald's in the country. Then he'd pick up 3 drawings, and he'd say, these are you. These are authentic. And it took me forever to learn what that meant. And as artists, that search for authenticity is a really confusing and difficult journey. So yeah, this fixation I have with drawing is not to pull it away from the other arts, but to parse out the different ways in which the arts can change our brains, change our hearts, change our lives in that sense.
Thank you. Are there questions in the audience? Yes.
Hi. I saw that most of your drawings are in watercolor. Is there a specific reason, like your mental health from that, or do you just really like watercolors?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I do love ink and watercolor. I love the fluidity of it. I like to work wet. I always work on wet paper, and I love the challenge and the accidents that happen and the inability sometimes to control the flow, and I think that speaks to struggling with anxiety and depression of the need and the desire for control of something that you can't control, right? And I think I developed a comfortability with ink and watercolor over time that has also probably stopped me from trying too much with other mediums. It's definitely my go-to, yeah.
I have some questions. Thank you so much for your talk. It was so emotional. At some point, I was almost crying. My question is more technical. My question is more technical. Would you explain a little bit about how you collaborate with other people? Like, a little bit about, how you find the collaborators and what's the relationship with them. Also, if you can, would you give any recommendation or suggestion for like students, like how they work in this area?
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting, I retired a little over a year ago, but my experience with students was that they were always way more collaborative than my colleagues were. They're in their apartments with GarageBand and this app and that program and that, and I learned a lot about collaboration from my students. So thank you. I'm sure you're all teaching your folks collaboration too. But the way I approached it early on, particularly with all the work I've done with Penn State School of Nursing and with the College of Medicine, was that I sought out people in those professions who were interested in qualitative methodologies first. So I looked at their websites in the college, and I went and visited, and I looked at people who were doing research that was driven by qualitative methodology. In my theater training, I had used story circles as a way of creating performance pieces that were community-based activist theater, where you gather people in a community who are experiencing a problem and they want a solution to the problem. You use story circles to get the problem out, to understand it, to define it, to shape it, and then you can go back into that community and create a performance piece with those folks that helps them engage the rest of their community in a solution to the problem. And I had done this around domestic abuse, around alcohol abuse, around mental health issues. I did a community-based theater intervention around fracking in Pennsylvania with a team of geologists. And it was my sense that the stories that you collect in Story Circle were perhaps more valuable three-dimensional data than questionnaires and interviews that were the usual qualitative techniques being used by these folks. So I made the pitch. Why don't we try using story circles in addition to the qualitative work that you're doing, and then you see if the results are more useful to you. And if they are, then we can talk about next steps in terms of launching a creative project around that work. And so I've done work with nurses on congestive heart failure, the frontline piece, the delirium piece, memory loss, aging, and 201, they found that, story circles are labor intensive, so it's not always the easiest and most efficient methodology for these folks who, like to be able to keep things moving. But for those who've done it and that we've collaborated together, the results have been pretty spectacular. And each of those projects resulted in more than one output: a published article, multiple conference presentations, an animation, and they have all fed my own creative and performance work. So that was my first was to try and find a place in qualitative methodology where we could speak each other's language and maybe find a way to then move the investigation forward that way.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Yes. Here you go.
What is your creative process?
Have you ever heard the saying, it's like herding cats? I am literally a person who can tend to be all over the place. But about 10 years ago, when I started drawing as a form of meditation, I found a way into a practice that I could stick with. I draw every day. First thing I do when I get up, I roll into my studio, I start with breathing, and then I draw. And that's 20 to 30 minutes a day. Most of that drawing goes nowhere. Sometimes I keep some of it. Sometimes I'll see something in it that I want to follow up on and do a more concentrated work or piece about. Sometimes I just use it to start fires in the backyard. Because it's not about the drawing, it's about that process, it's about, that practice has fed so much of my other work in terms of how do I make a performance piece? How do I approach a team about doing an animation? It all begins in that stillness of that meditative drawing where my heart rate slows down, my respiration rate slows. I find a peace that is elusive to me most of the day, every day. And then I've learned that I can return to that. So that's really my practice. It starts off in complete and utter beautiful peace and then goes to sheer chaos.
Thank you for that. I think we all can relate, but I really appreciate the emphasis on that stillness and quiet. And I think that, you know, we were talking about being a part of an institution of the size of where we are and the incredible aspect of it, but finding that stillness to spur you through your creative process is really important for us to hear. So thank you.
And just a real quick anecdote. I have a 5-year-old granddaughter, 2.5-year-old grandson. My granddaughter loves to draw, as children do, and I hope she never stops loving to draw. But when she's visiting, she will go into my studio and sit at my table and start drawing. And if I go in and say something, shh, I'm you, Papa. I'm drawing. And she literally is like in a flow state. And I'm like, yeah. It's kind of amazing.
That's amazing. I love it. Yes.
Hello.
Hi. Are you the one wearing Ramon's shirt?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Love. So I was wondering, do you have another way of coping with like your mental health stuff, or is it like just drawing? Because like personally, I do singing. That's a big way that I do it, and like my dad, he does like guitar and music and everything. So I was wondering if you had like something like that, or do you just stick kind of to the drawing side?
I mean, maintaining my mental well-being is, takes a village. So I mean, I still see a therapist. Not as frequently as I did before. I do take a medication, and then drawing is my primary way of doing it. I will say that there are times when I feel like the drawing activity is failing me. For example, my wife is going through a health crisis right now, and we're not exactly sure where it will lead. We're waiting on some significant test results. She's already a cancer survivor, and we're just hoping and praying that that's not what we're facing again. There are times when not falling off the depressive cliff is enormously difficult. But I do still cling to the drawing because I know that it is a solid partner. And if it didn't work that well today, it'll work better tomorrow. It'll work better the next day because it has become, like my wife, a really reliable partner in the process. So that it's maintaining mental well-being and it's such an individual thing depending on what you're struggling with or what you're battling, right? But those three things have been an essential part of my life: therapy, medication, and drawing. And to not talk about them is wrong. To not find the ability to share that and to be present to others who may benefit from hearing it. It would just not be who I am, right?
Thank you for your openness and all of our best wishes to you. As you go through this, and it sounds like you might be interested in a study we're going to talk about at the faculty panel tomorrow regarding music and mental health. So stay tuned for that. There's a really great study that we're starting soon. I'd like to turn to your administrative experience. As you know, we are a fairly new college with new programs, and we're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and ready to go. And I wondered what advice or perspectives you might offer us from that side, recommendations, especially coming from such collaborative work. That's a cornerstone of what we do in our mission. And what advice might you have for us as we develop along this path?
Yeah, and from what I can see, and that's another thing that I found really attractive about this opportunity when Haryung approached me in looking at who your college is and what your mission is and what you're trying to do, is that you're doing all the things I would have recommended you do, which is great. And I think that sort of unashamedly and unabashedly putting collaborative and integrative work front and center is and that has to become your mantra, and it has to be a spoken and repeated mantra. And then I think it's about the specifics of who you are here. Like I had a lot of failed attempts at Penn State to build collaborations. You don't talk about your failures, right? I had lots of folks who, seemed interested, and then we'd get a step or two down the way, and, somebody would say, that's not going to fit with our, we're the kind of qualitative research we're doing. There's no space for that. I don't see the value. I had, lots of doors closed. That's when I finally woke up and said, don't go to people. Maybe someone who's doing qualitative or quantitative research might come to you at some point with something you can't imagine, but do what you know. And so that's why I started tracking down folks that are doing qualitative work. I think you need to know exactly what's going on around you, not sort of the general, what people are doing in the world, but what's somebody doing in that building over there? What's somebody doing in that building right next to me? And then you start to build those collaborations one at a time. Out of the work I created came the Arts and Design Research Incubator at Penn State, which I'm so thrilled that I thought it was, when I announced my retirement, that no one would want to step up and take it, that it would just kind of get folded under. And there was a rush of people who wanted to be the director of the Arts and Design Research Incubator because we've had such successful projects that have gotten significant funding, some projects that are successful but haven't gotten significant funding, but it's a lively, and that all came from finding out exactly what somebody else at Penn State was doing and then leveraging that into a collaboration.
I love that. Thank you so much. Well, I think we're almost out of time, but when does the study come out? Is it going to be available in the year to come?
Yeah, we sent the final edits to the editor. It's the Journal of Applied Creative Psychology. We just sent the final edits this week, so it should be out within the next 6 months. I assume I can follow up with you all when it's there. And then our phase 2 of the study, which incorporates the brainwave data, we just finished data collection. And so that was the Renee Fleming NeuroArts Investigator Award, and now we're in the pipeline for an NIH award. We'll see what happens. We were shoved out of the pipeline not long ago because the study, anyway, I won't go into the politics of why our NIH grant was pushed out of the pipeline, but we appear to have gotten back in the pipeline. So we're very hopeful that we can scale that up and share that. The interesting thing about that study is, the first round of data was really about physiological data. So we were checking heart rate, respiration rate, and that's the data that's in there is RSV, and it was incredibly, promising data. Once we added the beta coupling, the brain activity data, which Sarah is the neuropsychologist, she really understands it way better than I do. That seems to be the linchpin to the question of whether or not something like a drawing as a mindful activity can become a habitual behavior, particularly for people who have trouble with mindfulness and can't stick with meditation, but that it's an active meditation process. And it appears from the brainwave data that we're seeing early that it strengthens the ability for those folks who need it to have it become a habitual behavior.
Well, thank you so much. Well, Bill, thank you for your time today. This has been such a pleasure. Thank you all for being here. There's snacks we would love for you to enjoy. Bill will be available to chat with you more and answer more questions. We also want to invite you to future events. They are always on Wednesdays, except for the next one. The next one will be on Thursday at 3 p.m. It's an unusual time, so stay tuned for that. And on behalf of everyone for our laser series and for our college, thank you so much for being here. See you next time.
Thank you.